So the French Revolution, let's imagine a scene. On the morning of 14th July 1789, the city of Paris was in state of alarm. Situation was like emergency. The king had commanded the troops to move into the city. Generally, we know troops, soldiers. Uh, Generally, they perform their duties on borders and on some kind of strategic locations. But the king ordered, commanded to enter into the city. So, of course, it was like something big is going to happen, right? So, rumors were spread that would soon order the army to open fire upon the citizens. So, rumors spread that king would order to the army to open fire upon the citizens. So some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall in Paris and decided to form People's Militia. People's Militia, the armed group of people to fight against. They broke into a number of government buildings in search of arms. They were needed weapons, arms, and they didn't have. Of course, common people generally they didn't have such kind of weapons to fight against. So they broke into different government buildings, right, in search of arms, weapons. Finally, a group of several hundred people marched towards the eastern part of the city and stormed the fortress prison, the Bastille. The Bastille. Wait, I'm going to show you Bastille prison, fortress prison. So just hold on. Bastille, as you can see on your screen here, a scene that time on 14 July 1789. So Bastille, they stormed the Bastille. Why? Because they hoped that they would find ammunition in the fortress prison. Right. But hold on. I forget to share. Really sorry. Okay. So here you can see Bastille on your screen. And the storm on Bastille, the reason behind that, they hoped that they would find ammunition in the fort, in the Bastille. So in the armed fight that followed, the commander of Bastille was killed and the prisoner released. True, there were only 7 prisoners. As you can see that people attacking on the Bastille. And Bastille was important. It was symbol of powers of the king. So the Bastille was hated by all. It was famous and it was hated by all. The reason? Because it stood for the despotic powers of the king, reckless, despotic, unfair powers of the king. The fortress was demolished and the stone fragments were sold in the market because it's like that symbol of king's power and broke into the pieces. So like pieces, stones of the fortress that like those were sold in the market because many people wanted to collect as a souvenir, right? Because souvenir of destruction of that symbol, right? So this is how, wait a moment. So this is how people storm on the Bastille and destroyed it. The days that follow so many rioting both in Paris, main city, as well as in the countryside, means rural area. Most people were protesting against the high price of bread. People were on the street because high price of the bread. This high price of the bread is one of the reasons responsible for the French Revolution. We shall discuss about it in this chapter in detail. Much later, when historians look back upon this time, they show it as the beginning of the chain of the event that ultimately lead to the execution of the king in France. This event is one of the main event, one of the events in the chain which led to the execution of the king. Generally, we have heard that execution of criminal, right? Here, execution of king of the France. Let's see. To the most people at the time did not anticipate this outcome, but let's see how did it happen and why. So to discuss in detail, first of all, let's talk about the France and the French society. We are going to discuss the reasons and factors responsible for the French Revolution. So let's start. First, I am going to discuss about the French society. So French society in early 18th century, or also we call the French society before the French Revolution and the French society during old regime. Here, this old regime term, that means the time before the revolution, pre-revolution era that we refer to as old regime. Got it? So let's see, as you can see on the screen, about the French society. The French society in the 18th century was divided into three estates. Estates like we call classes. So there were three classes. Before the revolution, French people were divided into three groups, three classes, all three estates, right? So in three estates, first one was the clergy, comprised priests. Second estate, nobility, and third one, the commoners. Right. So legally, first and second estate enjoyed that high privileges, and this system was based on birth, right? Rights based on birth. So the first estate was of Catholic Church officials called clergy, and those were on the top in the French society. Second, that nobility with the exemption of few liberals, and nobility wanted greater political influence for themselves. Nothing was left for the third estate. So here, third estate. Before we discuss about this cartoon, let me describe you the third estate. Third estate comprised common people. Third estate comprised common people. And third estate was divided into three categories. First category in third estate, like of course, rich among the third estate, like big businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, teachers, etc., as well as prosperous artisans. So those people were in the first category, top in the third estate, top in the third estate, not top in the French society, however, top in the third estate. Middle in the third estate, like peasants as well as artisans, craft persons, those were middle in the third estate. And bottom in the third estate, small peasants, landless laborers, urban workers, slaves, those people were bottom. and bottom in the third estate as well as bottom in the French society. On your screen, you can see the cartoon, right? A poor man, thin, bearing three people on your screen. Can you see? And this cartoon represents the French society in the old regime. Person in chain who support clergy and nobility on his back. Because the commoners, they had to work for the nobility and clergy. And as we know that the third estate comprised the common people comparatively poor. And those poor people had to pay taxes. First and second estate, clergy and nobility were exempted in tax. So this third estate comprised 90% of the population. However, only small number of them had land they cultivated. Those were the very less, and mainly land owned by the nobility. Right. About 60% of the land was owned by noble, and the church and other richer member of the third estate. Church had land as well. Member of the first estate, clergy and nobility, as I said, that they were exempted in tax as well as they enjoyed certain privileges. Right? They were exempt. They got exemption from paying taxes to the state, and apart from this, they had some privileges. So Nobel had feudal privileges too, like they owned the land, the feudal system in the French society. So this included feudal dues, which they extracted from the peasant, and they collected feudal dues like rent from the peasants. Uh, More about taxes. Tithe was kind of tax that collected by the church. So the church collected share of taxes called tithes from the third estate, as well as tithe that was direct tax collected by the state. And clergy and nobility, in the last, they enjoyed their first. So further about the French society and rise of middle class and the struggle, we shall discuss in the next session.